Imagine walking into a battlefield and hearing the rumble of tanks, the clatter of soldiers, and the thunder of artillery only to realize later that none of it was real. That was the world of the Ghost Army, a secret American unit in World War II that used deception, illusion, and sheer creativity to fool the German forces. What made this unit extraordinary was not its guns or soldiers, but artists, designers, and sound engineers, ordinary people turned into the most unusual soldiers the world had ever seen. The story began in 1943, when Allied commanders faced a challenge. The Germans had fortified positions and could easily predict troop movements. Traditional tactics would cost thousands of lives. Someone had to find a new way to protect soldiers and mislead the enemy. Enter the Ghost Army, officially known as the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. Its mission was simple in words but complex in execution: create the illusion of large Allied forces in places where there were none. The men recruited for this mission were far from typical soldiers. Many were advertising executives, painters, set designers, and sound engineers, people who had never handled a weapon in their lives. The army was looking for creativity over brute force, imagination over experience. Candidates underwent military training, but their true work was artistic, psychological warfare. They would paint, sculpt, build, and even compose sounds that could trick an entire army. One of the most remarkable tools in their arsenal was inflatable tanks and jeeps. Made from rubber and canvas, these life-size decoys could be set up in minutes. When a German reconnaissance plane flew over, the shadows and shapes from above looked convincingly like a heavily armed battalion. Not just vehicles, but artillery pieces and supply trucks were also inflated. At night, strategically placed lights created the illusion of activity and troop movement. Soldiers reported seeing entire divisions where there were none. Another innovation was sound deception. Ghost Army units had large record players and speakers mounted on trucks. Using pre-recorded sounds of tanks rolling, artillery fire, marching soldiers, and even construction, they could make a location seem like a bustling military base. The sounds were realistic enough that German commanders often redeployed troops to areas where no real soldiers existed. In some cases, these sound teams could simulate an entire battle happening miles away, while the real troops maneuvered unseen. The Ghost Army's operations were carefully planned. Each mission began with meticulous intelligence gathering, maps, aerial photographs, and German troop movements. Teams would then design an elaborate deception: which tanks to inflate, where to place speakers, what terrain features to highlight. Every detail mattered. From the pattern of footprints to the angle of a canvas tank, illusion was everything. If a single shadow looked off, the deception could fail. Their first significant mission occurred in France, 1944, shortly after the D-Day landings. Allied commanders wanted to divert German forces away from actual invasion points. The Ghost Army moved into position overnight, setting up inflatable tanks on high ground and playing recordings of troop movements. From the air, it appeared as if a major division was encamped in a location where no real soldiers were present. The Germans, convinced by the display, delayed reinforcements to the real front, giving Allied forces a critical advantage. Casualties were avoided, and progress continued more swiftly than expected. Over the next year, the Ghost Army carried out over 20 major operations across France, Belgium, and Germany. Each mission was a carefully orchestrated performance. In some cases, the unit even employed mock radio transmissions, sending fake messages in Morse code to fool enemy intelligence. Reconnaissance planes and spies often reported Allied activity based on these signals alone. The combination of visual illusions, sounds, and fake communications made German commanders believe they were facing a force much larger than reality. Life in the Ghost Army was far from glamorous. Soldiers worked long nights inflating decoys, setting up speakers, and painting fake insignias on tents. They carried weapons, but their true battle was creativity under pressure. Mistakes could be fatal. A blown rubber tank could ruin the deception, and if German scouts discovered the illusion, lives would be at risk. Yet the men persevered, often laughing at the absurdity of their own inventions. Inflatable jeeps rolling down muddy fields, giant papier-mâché guns, and recorded tank noises became daily realities. Despite the humor and ingenuity, the Ghost Army's impact was deadly serious. Military historians estimate that their operations saved thousands of Allied lives. By diverting German troops and misdirecting attacks, soldiers could advance with fewer casualties. Commanders began to rely on their expertise, often requesting their involvement in the most sensitive maneuvers. Yet the world knew almost nothing about them. The unit's existence remained a military secret for decades. Members were sworn to secrecy, and many returned home to ordinary civilian lives without anyone realizing the heroism of their performance. In addition to deception, the Ghost Army inspired confidence among Allied troops. Soldiers who witnessed the inflated tanks and heard the recorded battles often felt reassured, believing their numbers were overwhelming. Psychological warfare worked both ways, frightening the enemy and boosting the morale of the Allies. The unit's artistry and ingenuity proved that war was not just about brute force, but imagination and strategy. The Ghost Army disbanded in 1945, shortly after the war in Europe ended. Members returned to their careers as artists, designers, and engineers. Many never spoke of their service, as secrecy agreements forbade disclosure. It wasn't until the 1990s that the Ghost Army began to gain public attention. Declassified documents revealed the true scale of their operations and the clever tactics used to mislead the enemy. Exhibitions, documentaries, and books began to tell the story of these soldier artists who had changed the course of battles without firing a single shot. One surviving member, Bill Blass, later recalled, "We weren't out there to fight with guns. Our weapon was creativity. And for that, we could save lives without spilling blood." Modern military historians now consider the Ghost Army one of the most innovative units in the history of warfare. Their combination of art, engineering, and psychological tactics is studied in military academies around the world. From inflatable tanks to recorded battlefield sounds, their work foreshadowed modern concepts of information warfare and deception operations. Even decades later, the Ghost Army's story inspires people beyond the battlefield. Art schools, engineering programs, and creative teams study their operations as examples of imagination applied in high-stakes environments. The unit demonstrated that sometimes the most powerful weapon is not firepower, but ingenuity. In 2013, a traveling exhibition titled The Ghost Army of World War II opened in New York, showcasing original inflatable tanks, uniforms, sound equipment, and personal letters from the soldiers. Visitors were stunned to see how everyday artists had been transformed into masters of deception. The exhibition highlighted that war, though brutal, could also be shaped by cleverness and vision, a lesson as relevant today as it was 70 years ago. The Ghost Army may have faded from public memory for decades, but their impact cannot be overstated. By saving countless lives, diverting enemy forces, and proving the power of creativity in war, they carved a unique legacy. The men who once inflated tanks and played recorded battles are now celebrated as pioneers of modern tactical deception. Their story reminds us that in the darkest times, imagination can become a weapon, and courage comes in many forms, sometimes painted on a canvas or blown up like a rubber tank. By 1944, the Allied forces were preparing for a series of crucial offensives across Europe. Conventional strategies alone could not guarantee success against well-entrenched German defenses. Into this uncertainty stepped the Ghost Army, a unit unlike any other. Their task: mislead, confuse, and manipulate enemy perception, often without firing a single bullet. One of their first significant operations occurred in Normandy, shortly after the D-Day landings. The Allies needed to draw German attention away from actual troop movements in the west. Ghost Army units moved under cover of darkness, deploying inflatable tanks and jeeps along the French countryside. Strategically placed sound trucks played the noises of heavy artillery, marching soldiers, and motorized convoys. German reconnaissance aircraft spotted these formations from above. Commanders, convinced they were facing substantial Allied reinforcements, delayed their counterattacks, giving the real Allied divisions room to advance inland. In another remarkable mission in Operation Cobra, the Ghost Army created the illusion of a massive force in Normandy's hedgerows, an area the Germans believed heavily defended. They combined visual decoys with fake radio communications, including phony commands and troop updates. The Germans intercepted these transmissions and assumed an entire division was encamped there. Meanwhile, the real soldiers maneuvered undetected to breach enemy lines, a success that would have been far more costly without the deception. The unit's ingenuity extended beyond static illusions. In March 1945, near the Rhine River, the Ghost Army simulated a large bridgehead assault on one side of the river while the real crossing occurred miles away. Inflatable tanks, mock artillery positions, and sound effects of engine noise, marching, and construction convinced German forces that the attack was concentrated at the decoy site. Troops were redeployed, defenses were shifted, and the actual Allied advance faced significantly less resistance. The operation was a textbook example of tactical misdirection. Beyond France and Germany, the Ghost Army also played a role in Belgium and Luxembourg, where they had to contend with complex terrain and weather conditions. Snow, mud, and forested areas made visual deception more challenging. Soldiers improvised by using camouflage decoys and reflective materials to simulate movement. One team even placed fake smokestacks and burning fires to mimic the appearance of encampments. The Germans, observing these signs through binoculars and aerial reconnaissance, repeatedly overestimated Allied strength. A critical feature of the Ghost Army's success was the precision in timing. Deployments were synchronized with real troop movements, air raids, and artillery strikes. Each illusion was tailored to the enemy's expectations, taking into account terrain, observation angles, and even the likely response of German intelligence officers. The unit had to ensure that decoys were convincing from both ground and aerial perspectives. Mistakes were costly. On one occasion, a decoy tank was accidentally punctured by a sharp rock, revealing its false nature. Quick-thinking soldiers repositioned other decoys and adjusted sound simulations to maintain the illusion, demonstrating the adaptability and quick problem-solving essential to their missions. One of the lesser-known innovations of the Ghost Army was their use of perspective and scale. Decoy tanks were sometimes inflated larger than life or placed at a distance to create the impression of massive formations. Smaller decoys represented distant units. Sound engineers recorded variations of tank engines, marching, and vehicle movements, then played them at different volumes and directions to mimic the presence of multiple battalions. These combinations of visual and auditory cues made it almost impossible for German observers to determine actual troop numbers. The psychological aspect of their operations was equally significant. The Ghost Army's decoys created confusion, hesitation, and overestimation in enemy ranks. German commanders often deployed reserves to areas that posed no real threat, or delayed reinforcements while trying to verify troop positions. This gave the Allies the strategic advantage of mobility, surprise, and reduced casualties. In essence, the Ghost Army functioned as both a shield and a spear, protecting real troops while enabling offensive maneuvers. Despite operating under extreme secrecy, the Ghost Army maintained high morale and camaraderie. Soldiers often recounted nights of painting large-scale camouflage, rehearsing mock movements, and testing sound recordings. Humor played a role in maintaining focus. Inflatable jeeps rolling down muddy slopes, rubber tanks swaying in the wind, or sound engineers accidentally broadcasting a chicken clucking instead of a tank engine became stories shared among the unit. Yet beneath the light-hearted moments lay a profound sense of purpose. Every decoy, every sound recording, and every shadow cast on the battlefield represented lives saved and missions secured. The effectiveness of the Ghost Army became evident in post-war analyses. Commanders noted that in every major operation involving the unit, casualties were lower than expected, and advances occurred with fewer logistical obstacles. Soldiers who had participated in operations described their work as war by illusion, acknowledging that their artistic talents had directly contributed to victory. Historians estimate that their deception operations saved thousands of Allied lives and shortened campaigns that might have otherwise lasted weeks longer. After the war, members returned to civilian life, keeping their contributions secret due to military orders. Some became celebrated artists, architects, and engineers, while others simply resumed quiet careers. Recognition came slowly. In the 1990s, declassified documents revealed the scope of their operations, and historians began to appreciate the extraordinary combination of art, engineering, and psychological strategy that the Ghost Army represented. Today, the Ghost Army is remembered as a pioneering force in military deception. Their methods influenced modern tactical operations and information warfare, showing that innovation, imagination, and careful planning could achieve outcomes as decisive as traditional combat. Museums and exhibitions display their decoys, equipment, and mission plans, highlighting a unique chapter in World War II history where creativity became a weapon. The legacy of the Ghost Army also serves as a lesson in human ingenuity. Artists and engineers, once civilians, demonstrated that warfare is not only a matter of weapons, but also of ideas. Their work reminds us that thinking outside conventional boundaries can solve problems where brute force alone is insufficient. In an era dominated by machines and firepower, their story proves that strategy, illusion, and intelligence can sometimes determine victory. Ultimately, the Ghost Army's impact lies not just in the battles they influenced, but in the principle they embodied: creativity under pressure can save lives and alter history. Soldiers who once inflated rubber tanks and played recorded battle sounds became unsung heroes, their silent victories hidden for decades. But the world now knows, during one of history's deadliest wars, a secret army of artists and engineers used imagination as their greatest weapon, proving that courage comes in many forms, sometimes as a brush stroke, a sound wave, or a rubber tank on a muddy field. The Ghost Army, from shadows to legacy. For decades after World War II ended, the story of the Ghost Army remained a secret buried in classified military archives. While generals, soldiers, and civilians celebrated victory across Europe, the men who had spent nights inflating rubber tanks, playing recorded battles, and crafting illusions returned quietly to civilian life. Few spoke of their wartime missions. To the outside world, they were ordinary men, artists, engineers, and designers who had served their country like millions of others. Yet, behind their modesty lay a contribution that had saved thousands of lives and reshaped the battlefield without a single shot fired. The unit's secrecy was maintained rigorously. Every member had signed an oath prohibiting discussion of operations. Letters to family members were carefully worded. Some veterans used humor and vague descriptions to hint at their activities, speaking of performances rather than battles. Even among themselves, they sometimes referred to their work as playing war. But the reality was far from playful. Their artistic skills had become a weapon in a deadly conflict, blending visual trickery, sound engineering, and tactical intelligence into a revolutionary method of warfare. Recognition came slowly. In the 1990s, researchers discovered declassified documents detailing the Ghost Army's extensive operations. Photographs of inflated tanks, recordings of fake artillery, and mission plans painted a picture of ingenuity that stunned historians. It became clear that these men had not only misled enemy forces but had done so with precision, coordination, and creativity that rivaled any traditional military maneuver. Their work had directly contributed to major Allied successes, from the Normandy campaign to the crossing of the Rhine. Museums and exhibitions began to showcase their contributions. One of the most notable was the Ghost Army of World War II exhibition in New York, which featured original inflatable tanks, sound equipment, uniforms, and personal letters. Visitors were struck by the contrast between the ordinary backgrounds of the soldiers and the extraordinary impact of their work. School groups, military historians, and art enthusiasts alike marveled at the creativity applied to the horrors of war. For the first time, the public could see how artists and engineers had become unsung heroes, their skills literally saving lives on the front lines. In addition to exhibitions, documentaries, and books explored the Ghost Army's story in depth. Historians highlighted how the unit's operations were early examples of psychological warfare and tactical deception, influencing modern military strategy. Techniques developed by the Ghost Army, such as visual decoys, sound amplification, and fake communications, are now studied in military academies worldwide. Their innovative methods demonstrate that victory is not only achieved through firepower, but also through strategy, creativity, and manipulation of perception. Surviving veterans, many of whom had remained silent for decades, began to share their experiences. They described long nights setting up decoys, improvising solutions in challenging terrain, and coordinating with real troops to maximize impact. One veteran recalled carrying inflatable artillery through mud-soaked fields, only to watch German scouts fly over and report a massive battalion. Another spoke of spending hours recording tank sounds in a small studio, knowing that those sounds would save lives on the battlefield. These first-hand accounts added depth to the narrative, humanizing the men behind the mission and highlighting their courage in a unique form of combat. The legacy of the Ghost Army extends beyond history books. Their story emphasizes the power of innovation under pressure, showing that unconventional thinking can solve critical problems in life and death situations. Artists, engineers, and military strategists study their operations to this day, drawing lessons in creativity, adaptability, and teamwork. Even in modern warfare, where technology and data dominate, the Ghost Army's principle that perception can be as powerful as reality remains relevant. The men themselves never sought fame or accolades. Many returned to successful civilian careers, quietly carrying the memory of their missions. Yet the world eventually honored them in meaningful ways. In 2006, members of the Ghost Army received official recognition from the U.S. Congress, acknowledging their extraordinary contributions. Exhibitions, books, and documentaries continue to preserve their story, ensuring that their innovations and courage are remembered for future generations. Perhaps the most enduring lesson of the Ghost Army is the human capacity to adapt and innovate in extreme circumstances. While most soldiers relied on guns and tanks, these men relied on imagination, artistry, and psychological insight. They demonstrated that even in the darkest moments of war, creativity could become a weapon, and intellect could save lives. Their story is a testament to the unseen forces that shape history, revealing that not all heroes wear armor or carry rifles. Some wield paintbrushes, speakers, and rubber decoys. The Ghost Army's influence can also be seen in popular culture. Films, novels, and educational programs now highlight their operations, inspiring audiences with stories of ingenuity and courage. Students studying art, engineering, and military science explore how collaboration between disciplines can achieve remarkable outcomes, drawing directly from the lessons of these soldier artists. Their story reminds us that war is not only about destruction, it is also about innovation, strategy, and the power of human creativity. In conclusion, the Ghost Army represents a unique chapter in World War II history, where art and strategy intersected to save lives and alter the course of battles. From their secretive operations in France, Belgium, and Germany to their eventual recognition decades later, these men showed that imagination, precision, and courage can shape outcomes as decisively as traditional combat. The inflated tanks, recorded artillery, and clever illusions were more than tricks, they were instruments of survival, a testament to human ingenuity in times of crisis. Today, when we look back at the heroism of World War II, the Ghost Army stands as a reminder that courage takes many forms, and sometimes the quietest, most creative acts leave the deepest mark. Theirs is a story of shadows transformed into strategy, artistry into ammunition, and ordinary men into extraordinary heroes. It is a story that proves that even in war, innovation can be the most powerful weapon of all.